I'm a big believer that when you're looking for investors, the key is to fish in the right ponds, right? All too often, people will call and say, "Oh, can you tell me how you raise this money? I want to raise money for my company." And they'll say, "I'm going to call firm XYZ because they have a lot of money." It doesn't matter that they have a lot of money. It matters that they're interested in your sector, that they're interested in your phase of company, that you're interested in your size of check requirement, that they're interested in your growth metrics. And all these firms are very public about it. Like I said, was on Wall Street for a long time. Firms don't really hide what they're looking for. They tell you very clearly, this is what we're looking for. This is our investment thesis. All too often, entrepreneurs are asking the wrong firms for money, thinking that every firm that has money must be looking for a good idea. They're not. They're looking for specific things. Well, similarly, firms are looking, I think, for certain types of business models, and they're looking for certain types of companies and founders. And so we spend a lot of time trying to understand what's at the heart of our investors, right? Are they seeking entities like us that have a mature executive team, that have this transaction-based business model, that are in the government sector? Do they understand the sales cycles that are associated with that, the complexities that are there, the costs that are there? And if they really invest and spend the time and the research on us, that's when we know we've got a great partner.
Shane, welcome to Tech Scenes Unplugged.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, let's start from the top. Let's get into it. Tell me a little bit about ChampTitles.
Well, Jeff, Champ's a 6-year-old company, and our focus is on building technology to replace the title, lien, and registration capabilities that exist within DMVs all around the United States. So at the core, we're replacing those old pieces of technology that slow people down at the DMV.
So you took on a really easy thing to do, is basically what you're saying.
Everybody wants to absorb this change in government. There's no issue. They absolutely love the swift change. It's very popular.
So you guys are really at the forefront digitizing the DMV and elements of that. How much paper is happening still within those?
The paper is everywhere. Being digital is actually the exception. So our 4 states are the exception, not the standard, unfortunately. So we're trying to convince the other 46 or so, 47 if you count DC as a location, to change. And that's that's not easy. That's not easy. The paper is entrenched deeply within the processes. And unfortunately, it causes businesses and consumers to not be able to move at the pace that they want to move with their DMV transactions.
Right. So what was your background prior to this, and what kind of brought you to this intersection of your background and this opportunity?
I was really looking for the sexiest possible job out there. So I said, DMV software. My wife was like, ooh, I'm so excited to be around you. No, it was a combination of things that led to gathering the knowledge that it was required for me and for my co-founder to start the company. So I had a company that was in the automotive finance sector 26 years ago that I started.
Okay.
That was helping banks more efficiently process their loans and leases specific to auto loans. What I observed back then, it wasn't the problem I was solving, but what I observed back then was that it was very difficult for lenders to put liens on and off of their titles. So if you think about it, the business of a lender, you're giving a loan and then you have to attach a lien to it so that if anything goes wrong, you have a perfected interest in that vehicle. That can take weeks or months. I sold that company. Nothing crazy about that. Went to a couple other public companies, ultimately got recruited to Wall Street. And part of my time on Wall Street was spent really looking at trying to deploy money around the world in places where the systems of record were not very good. And the problem you immediately uncover is that lenders don't want to lend, insurers don't want to insure. when they don't know the provenance of the asset that is behind their loan or their insurance policy. So developing world countries progress slower because they have bad systems of record. So I initially thought, well, hey, we can try to go solve this problem around the world. And my co-founder was in automotive retail, and he said, hey, we don't need to look around the world to find developing nations that have this problem. Turns out our own states in the US have this problem, and it sits inside of the DMV. And as I mashed together that experience from 26 years ago and the time on Wall Street and his experience as a retailer, we realized over the course of a few years that this was a problem that needed to be addressed, and one we thought we could help serve the constituents of that world very well with new software.
Right. And that makes a lot of sense. One of the things I heard you refer to in the past is time tax.
Yeah.
There's time tax involved in this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's one of the things we're most passionate about. The time tax is the time that each of us as citizens has to spend on tasks related to being a citizen. So,
right.
How much time do you spend on filing your taxes, or how much time do you spend waiting in line at the DMV, or trying to title your car or sell your car or get your driver's license? All of these have a tax. That time we can't get back. There are 168 hours every week, and that's the only thing that really makes us equal, is that we each have 168 hours to spend. And if you're a lower income family and you take away working hours, you're taking away a disproportionately high percentage of that consumer's income for government related tasks. And that's just not fair. It's one thing if I take an hour and leave, we have a flexible work environment here, I can go do that. It'd be another thing if I was an hourly employee somewhere and I couldn't do that. I couldn't accomplish these tasks. And the time tax gets really, really expensive. It's just not fair. And so we set out to make the entire process that you have as a consumer with the DMV digital. That way, there is no time tax. You can do it on your coffee break. You can do it before work or after work. And the DMV can move at the pace that you want them to move. Now, there's lots of places in the government that have the time tax, but we're just attacking the one in the DMV for now.
Yeah. What's your vision of the space that you're playing in? I mean, obviously, it's to get all the states using it, but it seems like a great opportunity for other elements of maybe the DMV or other government entities to go more digital.
Yeah, I don't know if there will ever be a situation where every state has the same technology. In many ways, I hope that that's not the case, because the competition probably yields better results. But the biggest competitor we have is when a state decides to be a software company. So, that happens all too often. And maybe 40 years ago, it was fine for a state to try to do that. They could keep up with the tech and the demands of their constituents. And when I say constituents, I mean the power users of their systems.
Yeah.
Car dealers, fleet operators, insurance carriers, lenders, and all the service providers that work with those entities. And of course, consumers. Well, if you're a state and you're trying to build software 40 years ago, you could probably keep up with their needs because it was largely paper-based. Maybe you could even do that 20 years ago, but now it's impossible. Everyone expects real-time automated transactions that flow at the speed of checking in and out of your Amazon cart. And if you don't supply that, then you're going to create a bad customer experience. And that's what's happening inside of the DMVs when DMVs try to create their own software. And they look at it like, oh, we know how to solve our problems by building the software, but software is never built. There is no completion date. Like you ship software, but it's never over.
It's an evolution.
You're constantly working on it. And government just generally isn't kitted up to be able to afford that. So the private sector can deliver a better solution. And we think we can get that into the hands of not only entities here in the US, but overseas as well.
Okay. So there's an overseas component to this as well.
Yeah, I look at these developing world nations and I've sort of never let that go. There is a need in the world for these countries to be able to get the lending and to get the insurance that allows their economy to move forward at a faster rate. And an example that is, I think, it's both funny but also sad. I was in Zambia trying to lend money on cattle. And it was going to be really impactful to do this, really impactful for the community to be able to get more cattle and grow their herds faster and produce more milk and sell it and make more money. And we had all the necessary things lined up to be able to go do that. The problem was there was no system of record. No one could ever prove that a farmer owned the cow. And as a result, the lenders wouldn't lend, the insurers wouldn't insure. And I understand that. It's their business risk. They can't be putting money out on an asset they can't figure out the provenance of. If we solve that problem using the same technology, and we solve it here in the United States for DMVs and overseas for other things, I think we will have done something really good for the world.
There's a lot of win-win-wins here. I mean, even the carbon footprint, if you even think of it in those elements.
Yeah, I mean, the carbon, it's a knock-on effect that, we didn't fully embrace when we started the company, but now it's part of our ethos to be good at this. The average state saves about 10 or 12 million or so pieces of paper a year. Bigger states, obviously, a lot more, sort of based on population and normal processing. But it's not just the paper that you're saving, because that represents a lot of trees, a lot of waste, a lot of carbon. It's also the carbon from people not driving into the DMV. It's also the pollution that doesn't occur in salvage yards, because instead of the car sitting waiting for 60 days from the accident to when it can be sold because they're waiting on a title, now that happens in hours and they can sell that car immediately. I was on with a big retailer this morning, and their vision is, why are we even sitting on cars in a lot? Why can't we deliver them the day that someone buys it? And the reality is you can now. And so that's starting to really change the impact of on the environment and the carbon that gets out there. And I think the pollution that finds its way into the system and the paper that is unnecessary. Yeah.
I do think there's some complexities to it. It kind of reminds me of my dad always used to tell me, you can't buy your golf game, right? You can't just buy all the best clubs. You're gonna be a great golfer. It's like knowing how to play golf, and it must be the same way with this industry. You just can't buy your way in.
No, what I always tell investors, because they're always curious, what will come after us, who will come after us, sort of thing. Yeah, I'm sure we have no corner on genius. I'm sure there's some very smart people out there. But the reality is the barrier to entry in this space is not capital. The barrier to entry is knowledge. It's such an eclectic space. We often forget that we don't actually live in a democracy. We live in a constitutional republic. And the value of that statement is that when you live in a constitutional republic, you have to actually have individual quasi countries, we call them states, that have their own sets of rules, their own guidelines, and there's only an overarching federal structure in which they all have to agree to operate, like the Federal Interstate Commerce Clause. Other than that, they don't have to do what anybody else wants them to do. Their state can make up their own choices. That's the benefit of a constitutional republic. Well, the oddity of that is that you wind up with a lot of duplicative systems. But you could argue that that's bad. You could also say, well, that's good. It allows the states to stay more competitive. The reality is they can all be improved with a digital process and the connectivity that we can supply around the country.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to back up a little bit to the buy versus build. So I've spent a lot of time, earlier years of Collective Genius. We did a lot of innovative products and projects for large organizations that were being really innovative. Spent some time with some local governments working on their technology systems. And the idea of build versus buy in this case, for me, is the reality is even when they build, even when a lot of people are building, they're using contractors. And it's not their own talent. It's not their A team. It's bringing contractors in to build these systems. 10 years ago, everything was waterfall, very slow builds, not agile, no economies of scale. They're just building this one thing at this one time. And the workers are kind of in and out doing these projects, depending on who wins these government contracts. Yeah. And the contracts are contracts. So they might put someone in there for 2 years or pay this consulting company for these 3 people and a different consulting company for these people, 2-3 year projects for them to build this technology. Now, from my understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, you guys, even though the way that you price and you set yourself up is very different and kind of innovative too. It's not what most people do when they're working with the government.
You're exactly right. So I'm a big believer that we can do well by doing good. You heard about some of that with what we're trying to do for the environment and how we improve the quality of life by eliminating the time tax. But the thing I think that this company will be most well known for is that we're trying to pioneer and lead with a handful of other companies that are similarly, well-funded tech companies that are having a good track record of success. We're all trying to push the same model, which in government is called pay for performance. So the problem with government contracting is that most government contracting works by picking a vendor through an RFP and then paying the vendor a bunch of money up front, maybe some money over time if there's milestones or something, but usually it's a lot of money up front. And I look at that and I think it's perverse. I don't even pay my doctor up front for the services they provide. I wait until afterwards to find out if it worked. Why, as a country, are we in this habit, this awful habit of paying vendors? And immediately when you pay them, you've lost any incentive that they might have had to have a high quality of work. So they bring in the contractors, they rotate through junior people, they deliver it late because what's the penalty? They already got their money. Even if they miss a milestone payment, they just get deferred and they get it later. This is the silliest possible way to pay a vendor. I would never pay somebody that way. At least maybe there'd be an exception if I was building a spaceship or a defense tool. You kind of have to pay for those up front. I get it. But this is stuff in the DMV, right? Let's think about health and human services, DMV, tax departments, real estate departments. Like these are all places where we have to interact regularly as consumers or these power users if we work at a dealer or an insurance carrier, a bank. And somehow the vendors aren't paid for quality. They're paid to win a bid. That's sort of silly. Instead, what we've done is change to pay for performance. So we only get paid when the transactions occur. So if the consumer's behavior or the constituent's behavior hasn't shifted from paper to digital, then our system's not getting used and we're not getting paid. So we have to put everything in place to make sure that the technology works, that the software is integrated to the other state systems, that the change management occurs with the users. And then, and only then, do we get paid per transaction. And that, to me, is the right way to incent a company to always perform. Now, similarly, if rules change or laws change, I have to update my software for free. I don't get to charge anybody for that because I want to keep collecting that transaction fee. So I'm required to improve because of the structure of our contracts. And I think 85 to 90% of all government contracts could easily work this way. I'm not going to rest until we find the right way to get better contracting into government. And I think ours is the right way now. Maybe I'll find a better way down the road. But for now, I think this is the way to drive change. And it's the way to be fair. I look at a state that launches a new system and I say to myself, why is every taxpayer paying for that system when only some of the taxpayers are using it? And some of the taxpayers are using it more than others because they're power users, like a car dealer or a fleet or a bank. So why wouldn't they do more of it than my grandmother who doesn't need to drive a car? Now, they're deceased, but somebody's grandmother that doesn't need to drive a car anymore, that wouldn't be interacting with the DMV. And we have to start thinking logically about this as voters. It doesn't matter what party you're in. We have to look at what we're giving the government in form of our taxes and demand more accountability for it. And it starts with the vendors that our government is hiring. Our government is flush with vendors who do not care about the outcome of their software.
Right. And again, like a lot of times when they build their own, they're also contractors with fixed bids that are actually building that software. It's not internal government employees oftentimes.
Not internal. They're there. They're gone. You can't find them again. There's no incentive. They're not bonused or structured based on whether that worked or was on time. All of those things we have, and a handful of these other companies that are sort of joining together and saying there's a better way for government to interact with software. And it really is software as a service, right? That's really what it comes down to. Yeah.
Right. I'm just curious, how did that come about? Like, what happened where all of a sudden you guys kind of saw the light on that? I'm guessing that wasn't like before you started the company. Maybe it was. I don't know. Tell me, like, when did it happen?
It was. One of my sons asked me the other day, like, Dad, why do you do what you do? And I said, because I believe, or the way we do what we do is what I should say. because I believe in the concept of if you live in this great country, you better find a way to give back to it. You don't have to give back to it your entire life or even, the majority of your life, but find a way to give back at some stage in your life. And I think public service is part of that. But I also think if I'm going to work in the government sector and work with the government, I want to make sure I'm on the same side of the table as my customer. I never want to be opposed to my customer. When I was on Wall Street, we had a fiduciary obligation to our customers. And that was a legal requirement that we always do right by them. I wanted to bring that into government contracting. What's crazy about it is the government put a requirement on Wall Street to have fiduciary obligations to their customers, but the government didn't put the requirement on their own vendors to do it for themselves. So I wanted to try to bring that in, and the people that we hire here, it's part of our culture that, this has to be something that we drive to change, not because it makes us feel good, but because it's right for the business, it's right for the end users. It aligns everyone. We go into every meeting and no one's doubting why we're suggesting something. We're suggesting it because it'll yield better outcomes with better transactions that are digital, that ultimately are cheaper for everybody. And they know exactly what our incentives are. Our incentives are to get those transactions because that's how we get paid.
Right. I like that. I actually have the same philosophy and methodology a little bit with the sessions that I do with clients. I always tell them, I guarantee every session, if you're not happy with the session, I wouldn't want you to pay. And I also have companies that get funded oftentimes with their series A, B, or C. And they said, hey, we want to pay a year or 2 years ahead of time. So your sessions are done. So we never think twice about doing them. We want you to come in. And I always tell them, I don't want you to do that. I want to earn everyone, right? So I don't want that money ahead of time. Like, you choose when you want me to come in or the team to come in, and we'll do it on each time. I think the people doing the work value what they're doing more themselves when they're doing the work then too. They don't feel like it's just a given.
Well, you can't, there is no day where you're allowed to show up if that's your business model. There's no day that you're allowed to show up and not bring your A game because you might lose that customer. You might lose those transactions. So you're forcing yourself to always bring your A game, which means, you have to be ready for every day. You have to go into every day thinking, okay, how do I deliver for my customer? It must be nice, I suppose, to be able to take a day off, but and not think about that if I was in one of these other places. But I don't know how I'd live with myself. And I don't think most people want that out of their government. They want their government to be aligned with them. And I applaud your business model, and I'm sure that you feel the same way. And I'd be willing to bet, without asking you the question, I'd be willing to bet that because you bring your A game, nobody ever says no. They always keep coming back. And that's that's the best sign, right? Is that people say, no, I want more of this.
Right. Now, alignment's really important. I always say that alignment's the first thing before you can have focus. Everyone's like, probably the most common advice people give is focus, focus, focus. The investors tell the CEO and the board to focus. People tell their kids to focus, but no one's ever taken a class on focus that I'm aware of, right? But we all need to focus. What I find with teams, when teams come together, and once you get over that like 20 mark, now you're kind of starting building team of teams, and to focus a team of teams is difficult. What I found is alignment is the most important thing, is to create some focal points of where you're going, what you need to do at different points within that journey. And they may change as you evolve, but having that alignment so that we all are rowing in the same direction. And I think that obviously goes for the team, but it also goes for investors. And I was kind of curious, there are some uniques to what you do and some of your philosophies, especially the pricing. How did you align the investors with that?
Well, I'm a big believer that when you're looking for investors, the key is to fish in the right ponds, right? All too often, people will call and say, oh, can you tell me how you raise this money? I want to raise money for my company. And they'll say, I'm going to call firm XYZ because they have a lot of money. It doesn't matter that they have a lot of money. It matters that they're interested in your sector, that they're interested in your phase of company, that you're interested in your size of check requirement, that they're interested in your growth metrics. And all these firms are very public about it. Like I said, was on Wall Street for a long time. Firms don't really hide what they're looking for. They tell you very clearly, this is what we're looking for. This is our investment thesis. All too often, entrepreneurs are asking the wrong firms for money, thinking that every firm that has money must be looking for a good idea. They're not. They're looking for specific things. Well, similarly, firms are looking, I think, for certain types of business models, and they're looking for certain types of companies and founders. And so we spend a lot of time trying to understand what's at the heart of our investors, right? Are they seeking entities like us that have a mature executive team, that have this transaction-based business model, that are in the government sector. Do they understand the sales cycles that are associated with that, the complexities that are there, the costs that are there? And if they really invest and spend the time and the research on us, that's when we know we've got a great partner. And, in our last round was led by a company named Point 72. And, Point 72 did due diligence that, we were so proud to be a part of, because they dug deeper, understood our business better. They really spent a lot of time on it. And not that the other firms didn't spend good time on it too. The competing firms did, but it was just different. It was just different with them. They dug in deeper. They really understood the business model. And I think that, you have to find a firm that has a similar ethos to you. Like, we dig really deep. We spent a long time trying to develop the right business model. We want firms that appreciate that as well, and firms that appreciate our backgrounds. And you really have to go through many, many more investors to find that than you'd think, because it sounds silly to say, because, we just raised money, so you sound a little bit spoiled when you say it, but it is really true. You're not just looking for money, right? That you're looking for someone who can help your business grow. And that's, that was always a key factor for us, is finding the partners that we believe can help us grow the most. And that's how we ended up with some public companies and some preeminent venture firms that are invested in us.
So you went some of the strategic route as well with some of the public companies.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the strategic investors, I think there's always arguments to say, well, do you want fiscal investors? Do you want strategic investors? We have a combination of both, and the marriage between the two is important to us as well. The benefit of strategic investors isn't necessarily their check size. Now, some of them write very large checks, but it's usually the knowledge they bring to the table, the ability for you to, in some cases, test your product out. They give you the opportunity to fail in a closed door setting.
Yeah.
You're not as embarrassed, and you have to it takes a bit of a cultural leap of faith to try something out on your investors. So, because you feel this moral culpability to be right, but they're more excited to be part of it and give you a safe place to fail, because failure is such a big part of the way we learn. So we try to find places with that culture, and we've been very fortunate that the strategics are like that. And, the odd thing about strategics is that sometimes the management teams ebb and flow, and they don't have carry like fiscal firms. So it's not like the individual investor is going to get paid if all of a sudden the investment goes really well. So the incentives are different. But as long as the incentives that they put forward around their business align with what you're trying to build, a strategic can be, I think, one of the absolute best partners in any funding round.
Yeah. I think a lot of people kind of miss that point with strategics, and I think that's really important.
Well, you don't have to educate them, right? They come in fully aware of your sector. They know more about it than you do. They lived it for their whole life. Then they can come on with preconceived notions of what it is too. So maybe they don't want to change, but generally they're not in the venture arms of those strategics because they're averse to change. They're usually looking for change agents that they can put money into. You learn a lot, and you find folks that talk your language a lot faster with a strategic.
Yeah. One of the things I want to talk to you about, and I think it is unique and different for you guys, is post the pandemic, a lot of the teams, the majority of the teams I work with are remote. Maybe they're not remote first. Maybe they have a few offices, but a lot of their staff is remote, especially their leadership teams. So, when I'm doing annual and quarterly sessions with these leadership teams, most of the time, a few people are flying in, if not majority of the people flying in to get together for those sessions. You guys have a different model to that.
Yeah, we do. Not afraid to take a compliment we don't deserve and temporarily align ourselves with the great inventor Elon Musk. But I think he had a great saying, which is you can pretend to work somewhere else. We don't believe that remote in a permanent way is the right way to build a fast-growing company. It doesn't mean it's not possible. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work in certain sectors or certain industries. But we're trying to build a software company and move really fast in a place that is not accustomed to change, the government.
Right.
And so, when you're trying to do that and you add in the complexity of not being together, I think you wind up moving a little bit slower. And I suppose if you're incredibly well funded or have, a massive library of, commercial contracts that are just dumping money on top of you every day. You can move a little slower and not worry too much. We don't have that luxury. We're still a young company. And so we want to be gritty and fast and nimble. And we feel that we can do that a lot more when we're together. Now, we do have some people that have earned the right to be more remote than others because of their particular skill sets and what have you. But the reality is that the vast majority of our company is together. Now, one thing we have done is realize that we can create little geographic centers, kind of little offices or geographic locations where several employees are near each other. And that helps too, because even if they were, let's call it earned the right to be remote, they're actually near or with other people within the same company. So, it kind of goes back to the old methodology of, you have an office and you have a branch office and you have another branch office.
Right.
We do because the culture builds in a little bit faster. And for us, it's not just culture, right? I mean, culture is a great byproduct if it works. But for us, the really important thing is speed. We did a comparison. We tried remote. It didn't work. We were going slower. When we were together and moving faster, it was a classic AB test.
Yeah.
And so we said, well, let's be together. And it worked for us. Doesn't mean that we have the only answer, but it is our answer.
There's definitely pros and cons to both, I believe. And from my experience, it's interesting. The teams that are remote, we have to be very clear about the cadence of communication. And so, what we do is that review and planning every 90 days that aligns that when you're planning through your vision. Having that cadence with the leadership team every 90 days is important. Having that weekly meeting is super important too, because that's the glue that keeps this communication together. And if the teams don't have that, very, very difficult to work remotely. I find the teams that are together, still having that cadence is very important to keep that alignment and focus and accountability. One of the things that I found unique that I've seen kind of develop with teams that are together is that sometimes they change their plans too much. They're like communicating after every call, or you something happens with an investor, and then all of a sudden you like pull the team together. In the office, you start talking about it, and it's those conversations that happen in the hallways that all of a sudden are like, okay, yeah, maybe we should go to this other direction. Now that can happen with Slack too. I've seen teams change their direction from a Slack channel, which blows my mind. But I think there's something to it. It doesn't really matter if it's remote or if you're together. I think there's something about having space to have conversations about what's working, what's not working, and times in which you do make iterations and changes, and times where you're just executing. And I think it's unique if you're in the office or outside the office. Sometimes that may evolve differently.
Yeah, I think what we're finding is that more and more the applicants that are seeking us out because there's a place for them to go and they have relationships and they value that dialogue that you're talking about, that back and forth to challenge their ideas. I look at it like, do you ever pull up to a stoplight and let's say there's two lanes, neither of them are turning lanes. They're both going straight. The turning lanes are separate. So you're in the straight lanes. One line of traffic is always considerably longer than another. You say to yourself, why would anyone get in the long line? Yet a whole list of people did, a whole bunch of people. And like they keep piling on. And the reality is that not everybody has the confidence to get in the short line. Not everybody wants to be at the front and when the light goes green, be the first to move off. Not everybody's comfortable with that. And so some people need that dialogue back and forth to be able to talk with their peers and have their ideas tested, maybe because they don't have the confidence or because that's the way they work or the way their brain processes information. Right. But we want to create an environment where they can do that on a regular basis. So I look at those conversations and say more times than not, if the team's determined that we needed to change because they got together after a call, we should do a postmortem and find out if that's really the right choice. But a quick no is as valuable as a yes. So right. I think that more and more applicants are trying to find companies that can create that kind of environment for them. If someone's figured out how to do it remotely, DM me on LinkedIn and tell me how you did it because I'd like to learn. I'll tell you how we do it here.
Yeah, that's great. Talking about people, I think one of the most important things, and one of the things I wrote about in my book is creating an environment of learning. And I think people that are willing to learn are willing to change. And I think that's one of the most important dynamics or behaviors of people that you need in your organization. And it reminds me of something that you and I talked about before, but you said, I believe, is no is the stumbling the stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like you need people in your organization that have this thirst to learn and try to figure out things, because in the spaces that we work, it's always doing things that have never been done before. So you need people in the organization willing and hungry to try to figure out that yes, to figure out that answer, to figure out how that $1 on one thing can turn into 3 to 5 to 10. And then if you tweak it, maybe that $1 is 100, right? And so that learning environment, I think, is super important in organizations. I'd love to hear your kind of take on that phrase that you use, that no is a stumbling block to yes.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to work at Cisco Systems for a bit of time, and I actually stole that from John Chambers. I remember him walking into our sales meeting one time, and our sales training session, and he said, "You know what I love?" He's got a little bit of an accent. He's like, "You know what I love about y'all is that you just treat no as a stumbling block on the way to yes. A customer says no, and you're just like, that's great. We're going to figure out how you're going to get this." And
Right.
It's not because they were desperate to sell him something. It was like, this was back when people were debating whether or not they needed more access to the internet. Turns out Cisco might have been right. Everybody needs a ton of access to the internet. Try turning the internet off and seeing how your day goes. And so, I think that mentality of treating no as a stumbling block on the way to yes exists inside of winning cultures that look at a big problem, know that they have the right outline for where the world is going in their sector, but also know that most of their users don't yet see that vision. It's kind of like seeing the Matrix or something. Until you've figured out what it is, you're not sure what it is. But the result is that you have to have that mentality when you work at a place like that, because you're going to constantly hear no in your sector, right? I mean, Cisco was told all the time, "I've got plenty of routers and switches." Well, the answer is no, you don't. All right, and you need more, and the cloud needs more now. But the for us inside of the DMV and inside of the user groups of dealers, lenders, fleets, insurance carriers, consumers, they absolutely are demanding that the process be digital for them to interact with their DMV, and DMVs are still trying to figure out how it can't be.
Right.
And so you as a software supplier to the DMV, you're constantly hearing, "I don't know if we need that," or "maybe our rule says we can't," and what about this law? Or the users aren't telling us. And it's like, the users aren't telling you. You're literally the butt of all jokes relative to government services. And you don't think your users are telling you there's a problem. But, if they don't hear it, if there's not a line out the door, how would they know? And so that mentality has to just be embedded inside of a software company that's trying to sell into this space. And we try to hire people that have that, because then they're going to hear no, and they're going to get really curious why there was a no. They're going to get really curious about how to get to yes. What solution do they need to bring forward? What didn't make sense about how they explained it? Was it the way we explained it? Was it the person that explained it? Was it the time we explained it? And how do we get others to create an echo chamber with us that this has to happen, that the world wants to go digital in this space? And so that mentality becomes the single most important piece of the way we interview and how we figure out who's going to be right for our team is, do they have that mentality?
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
So when you wrote the book, Peak Teams, what was your motivation to do that?
I've been in venture world for probably 25 years now, and I haven't really seen someone write a book on how to really create an execution model for venture-backed companies. There's a lot of models out there for businesses. Venture-backed teams are very unique because they're always doing something that's never been done before. So you can't, if I wanted to start a plumbing company, I could probably go talk to some plumbing companies and figure out what their model and how to operate and how to grow their business. But for companies that have never done what these people are doing before, there's no model for it, right? And so the model is really an operating system. And I think you really have to create a clear operating system to create true symbiosis of the team, alignment, learning, communication, empowerment of that team that really embody those behaviors. And so what I've done and my team has done is really try to identify what are the tools that we need and what's the cadence that we need to do this. So having that 90-day cadence where we're reviewing, planning, 3-year vision, 1-year plan, OKRs, KPIs, but put them all together. Because I think we've all learned those things over the years and tried a bunch of those things. And then when a leadership team comes together, as a CEO like yourself, you bring people in that are smart, they've been there, they've done it before, and they all have their own way of working. It's like 5 different software pieces come in, and now your job is to create APIs and duct tape this together in a way that everybody's happy and feels empowered. I think that's really challenging. And so what I why I wrote the book was I wanted to create and communicate a clear operating system so a leadership team could say, hey, this is how we can operate and work together. And it will bring us all together and it will empower us and let us run where the CEO has visibility and we have visibility on the organization. So that's why I wrote the book, is I really didn't feel like there was a good system out there or hasn't communicated in a way that allows people to really embody a system. So it's more about how they work than what
I love that. It's your own way of giving back to this community that brought you a lot in the 25 years of working within it. So that's a neat gift back to the community.
Yeah, at the end of the day, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, easy things that teams can do, create better communication, better alignment, better focus. And at the end of the day, I think we can just create more companies that are successful. I think there's a lot of ways to get to that peak. And if the teams keep on going, they can do that. I think sometimes they fall apart just because of these easy, low-hanging things that they could do. So, all right. Now that brings us to the final question, which is, I'm glad you're sitting down. This is a really important question. It's probably one of the most important questions you've ever been asked. And I'm so grateful that I get to ask it. So here's the scenario. You're on a desert island. You're stuck there the rest of your life. It's good though, because it's a nice tropical island. You have plenty of food and water and shelter. So that's nice. But the one thing that you don't have is entertainment. But luckily, an 80s boombox drifted ashore with endless batteries, but all you can only bring cassette tape to listen to the rest of your life. It could be any era, any genre, but you only can bring one. Shane, what are you going to bring?
Man, I think it might be the very first cassette tape I ever owned. I sort of fell in love with music because of this. And I still remember cracking it open endlessly and taking out the cover and staring at it. And I thought the art was really cool. And it's really simple, but it worked. And everybody knows the album. It's AC/DC, Back in Black.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
You know why they're called AC/DC, right?
I think I do know this. Yeah, but go ahead.
They only know 3 chords, A, C, and D.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Right. That's fine. Simple works for me. I'm good.
That is not why they're called AC/DC, but that's my joke. No, I think that's a good answer. And that's a good album. That's a good album.
Yeah. A lot of great songs.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thanks for joining me on Tech Scenes Unplugged. It was fun talking with you.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, Jeff. Thanks so much.